Welcome everybody to what I promise is going to be an engaging, informative, and interesting conversation. We are going to accelerate Black leadership in clean tech, and we have with us three phenomenal people, all exceptional leaders, people who have built things, have been incredibly successful in clean tech, and I might call them unicorns. Because I can tell you, as I shared with them earlier this week, and I will share with all of you out there, having spent 30 years of my career in energy, I never thought Black leadership in climate and climate tech was ever going to be a thing. And so I am so incredibly thrilled to see you all. With us today, we have Sharina Perry, who is the founder of Utopia Plastics, Camille Terry, who is the CEO of Charger Help, Gilbert Campbell, who is the founder and CEO of Volt Energy Utility. And so what I would like to do is have them introduce themselves by answering one question, and tell us a little bit about what you do, how you got here, and all of that. I'm going to give you about 3 to 5 minutes. So a little bit of time because I really want us to get to Q&A, and we will start with Ms. Camille. And so the question is, why climate tech? Why clean tech? Of all the things that you could have chosen to make your life's work and use your talents on, you chose this. And so we'd love to hear about what you're doing and why you chose this. Camille.
Thanks, Paula. Well, for me, I'm from South Central Los Angeles. I am the daughter of two immigrants, individuals who came here from Belize. And for me, why climate is because folks in my community are oftentimes disproportionately impacted by climate. Unfortunately, my mom passed away last year due to cancer. My brothers have asthma. My cousins got asthma. When we talk about just like the climate crisis, to me, it's a health crisis. And so it felt very important to me to be able to provide solutions and to be helpful, especially for something that is, that's just a horrible thing that's happening, disproportionately to folks in my community.
Thank you. And tell me a little bit about Charger Help. Tell us all about Charger Help. I shouldn't act like I'm the only one here.
No worries. Well, yeah, Charger Help, we fix charging stations. Simply put, if you don't know, sometimes charging stations break. If you drive an electric vehicle, you'll know that they break a lot. But funny enough, the issues that charging stations experience are actually software issues and communication issues. And the way that we go about solving this problem is that we hire locally, but we built out our own technology platform in order to aggregate data, in order to understand the root cause of some of these issues, to provide solutions. And honestly, Paula, the most exciting thing about the work that we do is because charging stations are the first publicly deployed assets. And so if we figure out ways in which to ensure the reliability and uptime of this IoT asset, companies such as Charger Help and others that are coming, next, right, will be able to really impact what smart cities look like, really impact what the future looks like, and do it in a very equitable way.
Yeah, that's a gangster move, Camille.
Oh,
it is. It's awesome. It's awesome. I would not have thought of that. That's great. Mr. Gilbert Campbell, founder and CEO of Volt Energy Utility. Why, of all the things that you could have done with that wonderful Howard education, why climate tech?
Well, first off, good to see you, Paul. Always great to catch up with friends and Camille and Sharina as well. And good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, Gilbert Campbell, founder and CEO of Volt Energy Utility, but also co-founder of a company called Volt Energy that I started, I'm getting old, 13 years ago. But the reason I got into climate tech was really based off of family values that were instilled in me. Not a lot of people know, but my father was a pastor, my grandfather was a pastor, and my great-grandfather was a pastor. And on the other side, we had a lot of educators in my family. So it was always instilled in me from day one, find something purposeful and serve the communities that we're fortunate enough to, to work and live in. So with that said, I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur that was doing something that was benefiting the community. So in 2006, when clean energy was not hot, no one was talking about, solar and wind and EVs, I had an opportunity to do some consulting work for a company that manufactured wind turbines out of Denmark. And doing so, got to learn more and more about clean tech, why it made sense, and for most businesses outside of payroll, utility cost being the second highest line item. So founded Volt Energy, which was a solar development company focusing on rooftop solar with one of my good college classmates, Antonio Francis, in 2009. And two of the North Star principles for us in starting that company was two things: making sure that the clean energy industry looks more like America, has a lot of work to be done, has made improvements since 2009, but still needs a lot of drastic improvements to look like America. And second was to make sure young people, but particularly young people of color, were being privy to all the opportunities in clean energy. 2 years ago, around the tragic killing of George Floyd, a lot of the big tech companies made very bold proclamations to work with more African-American companies in their supply chain. One area that they designated was as it relates to procuring large utility scale solar projects, which is done through what's called a virtual power purchase agreement. So we decided to enter that space, but we wanted to bring innovation into the industry. And the innovation was making sure that underserved minority and rural communities were benefiting from utility scale solar. So last thing, launched a foundation about a year ago called Sharing the Power Foundation, where our corporate partners, through our environmental justice power purchase agreement, which is a new concept we developed, our projects with our corporate partners fund the foundation that's making transformational investments in minority and rural communities across the country to address many of the environmental justice issues that Camille touched on, but also investing in young people, which we firmly believe is the greatest investment that you can make.
Another gangster move. Thank you, Gilbert. And so, listen, to those of you out here in the cloud, please do not lose this subtle message about what innovation diversity brings to the table. And our next speaker, Sharina Perry, is also an incredible innovator, founder of Utopia Plastics. Sharina, same question. Why this? And I don't know that Sharina knows that I know this, but I think I overheard that you've been at this for more than 2 decades. Yes? You're on mute, Sharina.
Thank you, Paula. I got excited. I've been an entrepreneur for over 25 years, and I will transparently say, no, I didn't see a career for me in clean tech. But I do feel like that there's a point in our lives where vision meets education, experience, and ultimately leads to purpose. And when you understand that, you'll understand. And I tell people today, this is my life's work. I had no idea that my career path was preparing me for this. From why Utopia in and of itself, Utopia, when I was a young girl, I didn't understand disparity. I did not understand why there were people that were underserved. I did not understand why my family experienced some of the things that it did, or why my parents or grandparents told me some of the stories that they told me. Utopia was my escape from that. It was believing in a better world and imagining if we did things differently. And so as a young girl, we would solve all problems through Utopia. Fast forward, I spent most of my career in the cable and internet space, I was the only African-American woman in the country as a prime government contractor building these cable infrastructures. In 2018, my entrepreneurial experience, I've always felt like I can do whatever I chose to. But it was, Camille mentioned earlier about family and how that had impacted her mother. Well, my nephew was diagnosed with neurofibromatosis 2, which is an incurable growth of tumors. It adversely affects the African-American community as well. And at 19 years old, his quality of life had changed. It led me to start studying plant material. And in plant material, I learned that it could be really shrink tumors. But my education and study of it, I dove in, studied over 600 white papers about the plants, and learned that they could be an alternative to petroleum, cotton, and wood. And it was understanding that there was solutions out there, and that people, I believe that we knew about some of these solutions, but just had not figured out how to monetize them. And I really began to look at it more in a holistic way. There are four things that matter for healthy communities: our health and wellness, our education, our family, and our economic opportunity. And Black communities and minority communities are often disenfranchised in these areas. My model, Utopia model, that we created to build what we believe is a future of true sustainability, exists by keeping those core elements in mind. Well, after creating a health and wellness line, I then simply chose to make a paper straw in my kitchen. And fast forward to today, that invention of a paper straw in my kitchen is now a commercialized pelletized resin that the crops we use add value to the environment, and it is a drop-in replacement to your traditional fossil fuels, and makes also, the IP includes making fossil fuel polymers eco-friendly.
Thank you so much, Sharina. Excuse me. All of you will note that in the Q&A, there are links to each of our panelists' websites. I really do encourage you to check out what they're doing. The title of this is Accelerating Black Leadership in Climate Tech, and how we do that without really understanding the work that these three panelists are doing, we're not going to get it right. And so I do want to just call attention to that. So look, you're all doing some great stuff. It could not have been easy, right? I mean, if it was easy, please raise your hand, but I can't imagine that it was easy. So share with us a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced. And when you do that, if you have some suggestions for the audience, those of us who are listening, of how we could do something different, right? How a policy could be different, how a larger business that may be supporting you could be different. What is that thing that could be different that would have made it easier for you to do what you're doing now? Mr. Campbell, I'm going to let you start with that one.
Okay, great question. So I'll say, starting out, when I launched Volt Energy in 2009 as an early company in an emerging industry, one of the challenges was we had a lot of big corporations that wanted to work with us, but we also recognized that we had some gaps as a company that we were growing, and we were searching for a partner to help shore up some areas that we felt were, areas of opportunity to grow our company, and finding a larger kind of mentor protege partner. And thinking that coming with some of the largest companies in the world, that there would be larger solar development companies that would be interested in partnering, or organizations that would help foster those introductions, and fell on deaf ears. And part of it was, I think, was that a lot of companies, the new industry, were growing fast and diversity wasn't at the top of mind. But where I found a home, ironically, was in utility and oil and gas companies. And I was heavily involved in an organization at the time that was more focused on oil and gas utilities, which was the American Associations of Blacks in Energy. Paula, you're very well loved. And that's how folks like Paula, Frank Stewart, Hilda Penix Ragland, Carolyn Green, Timothy Simon, Tom Graham, I can go on and on, that worked in a different industry, but invested in me, and were able to open doors and led to partnerships and contracts with larger companies. So part of the learning curve is, as we're talking about equity and ownership and creating real wealth for Black businesses in clean tech, if you're in a position, whether you're a company, when you're thinking about procurement, the RFP process has a lot of inherent biases. If you're a new company, you don't have the experience that other companies have. You may not have the balance sheet compared to larger companies. So look at bilaterally at ways that you can work with, African-American and diverse firms creatively. Maybe it's a pilot, or maybe you have a pilot or, RFP that you just run for diverse firms where you're thinking out of the box. If you're an investor and thinking about making investments, you have power at the credit committee to say, is there ways that we can do things differently? Or if we're going to invest in some larger companies, what are they really doing? Let's look under the hood to work with and help scale diverse firms. So if you're a consumer, question the companies that you're working with or you're buying products and services from, to say, are you working, as you work towards your decarbonization goals, which are great, but are you doing it in a way that's benefiting all communities and working with a diverse group in your supply chain? So those are some of the few little things that I would share for those in the audience, that we all have a part to play.
Thank you so much for that, Gilbert, because I think what you're really touching on is, as we've been talking about this just transition and increasing representation and diversity, we're not just talking about jobs, which is often where the conversation starts and ends, with increasing our representation in jobs. What you're really talking about is wealth creation, creating opportunity for people to own things, to run things, and then to grow, as well as provide other opportunity for other people. So really appreciate that response. Sharina, as someone who has, some IP behind her product, why don't you share with us, a little bit of what may be a challenge and something that we could all collectively think about, how do we change that to make it easier for those who come behind you?
Early on, Paula, you used the word unicorn, and that there are unicorns in this space. Mm-hmm. Well, being a unicorn also means barriers. It means stereotypes and biases, especially as it relates to IP. And what I encounter in my space is, while many companies are looking to diversify their supply chain by adding people of color, particularly Black people, as suppliers in their chain, the ask of us as a minority is far different from the ask of our counterparts often. And in fact, very boldly, in an entitled way, sometimes those questions are asked in a very offensive way, whereas we end up having to find ourselves proving far more than our counterparts would have to prove. As a pelletized resin provider, we've had companies globally use our material. We've been very transparent in filing for our trademarks and our patents, but we also want to be in the work of doing good. We're in this space because we deserve to be in this space. And that must be something that's kept in mind when seeking to do business, and not to treat the company or the enterprise that is minority owned as less than, but to view them in the same way that you would their counterparts.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, Sharina. I think we all can understand that we all have hidden biases that we don't necessarily see, but they reflect themselves in some very interesting ways. And I would just kind of restate what you said. I call it but they must be qualified effect, right? This idea that when you're hiring and then you add, we really want to get some great minority candidates, but they have to be qualified. There's an assumption baked into the back end of that term. And so, for all of us who are listening, we really, and I say this collectively, we need to check ourselves sometimes about what are the questions that we're asking. And if they are different, why are they different? And do we have reason for them to be different? So really appreciate you being that open. Camille, tell us, charge your help. What are the challenges, and what is that thing that we collectively could be doing differently so we can accelerate, increase leadership in climate tech?
Yeah, one of the things that's always top of mind for us is, being very excited about the increased money towards climate tech. And that climate tech is even like a thing. I think we finally, at least on the EV charging space, we finally hit our moment. I've been in this industry for almost 8 years now. But with that, right, with that added investment, the things that we think a lot about is like, how do we do the work with good care and quality? And so one of the barriers for Charger Hope is that prior to starting a company, I had already seen anecdotally that the infrastructure was not working. And one of the reasons why the infrastructure wasn't really taken care of is because there was never funding set aside for operations and maintenance. And there wasn't really mechanisms to hold companies accountable if they were deploying infrastructure that was inoperable. And so we spent quite a bit of time in DC and also in Sacramento in order to bring, true data to paint the picture that a lot of folks already knew anecdotally. So for us, what's helpful are two things. I think that as you implement, you should always be measuring. I'm a project manager at heart, so I always like to go back, like, what is not working, and being okay the first try, like things will not work. But like the ideal is to be iterative, right? And how fast can you learn, and how fast can you, rely on good data? And so for Charger Help, what we're most excited about through these learnings is to show that if you're able to bring data to a space and you tell the story, which is what we did a lot about, we told the Charger Help story often, and we told the story of how, we employ people to go out and survey stations all across the United States within a month and a half. These are folks that were coming from oil and gas and telecom and cable. And we were able to bring the data, to the federal institutions and then also to the state. And then we got laws passed, right? Which is definitely a lot easier than we got laws passed, but we did. But I think that like my learning was just like, okay, how can you, find good data? How can you do it in a community way? How can you put equity at the forefront? And then how can you share that? And I always try to share that with other entrepreneurs, specifically within climate tech, is that the laws are not always in our favor, or we're oftentimes not even thought about, just climate in general, right? And so we have a huge need to be aware of what is passing, and a huge need to bring data to back up what we're saying should be passing.
Great. Thank you so much, Camille. And so you really talked a bit about like learning and constantly learning, but also a very collaborative approach. Which has its own complexities, I would think, because you're dealing with lots of different stakeholders and people who have different ideas. I would like to say, though, congratulations, because getting a law passed is actually the hard part. I know it probably feels like after the law passes the hard part, but actually getting the law passed, because that is the ultimate collaborative process. Getting it passed is the hard part. We've got some questions here. So what I'm going to do is ask a couple of these questions. We've got about 23 minutes left. I'm going to encourage folks to continue to ask questions. But the first one that has some votes says, I've heard, and this is from Dr. Christian Brand, I've heard that EV charging stations could potentially lead to utility infrastructure needing to be upgraded, and the costs might be passed on to local communities. Could a panelist speak to the intersection between EV charging stations and energy burden? Does anyone feel comfortable answering that? I can take a stab at a piece of it, but Camille, I'm going to kick it off to you first.
Yeah, I think the most important, so stations are smart, right? Most stations are smart, so they're software enabled. And a software enabled station does help the grid. It helps with load management. It helps be able to control the energy source, to be able to do, more with little. And the reason why we're so, committed to operations and maintenance is that if the software doesn't properly operate, it actually does drive up the cost. It actually does negatively impact the grid. So you have to have both and. And the last thing I say that has been very beautiful to see actually from the EV charging industry is that there is a lot of funding that is earmarked for, low income and they call it disadvantaged communities. What I've seen happen, though, oftentimes, if you're not able to deploy the infrastructure, the money goes back into the pot. And some of the reasons why you wouldn't be able to deploy infrastructure, I used to deploy infrastructure at my prior company. A lot of it comes down to permitting. We would have some buildings where they weren't up to code, so they didn't want you to do any type of going to permit for EV charging because it would cause them to get their entire situation looked at, right? There's a lot of just underlining things that comes with doing construction in communities that are disadvantaged. And I do think that the industry tries to adjust it, but I think just as anything, I think that there needs to be more data, more people to really talk and unpack, what those barriers has been.
Yeah. I would also just, Dr. Brand, add that, the IIJA and the IRA actually put in a lot of money for grid modernization so that what your question is asking would not happen. We do have communities that can't adopt additional load. They need the grid to be integrated, upgraded. And so there's money available for utilities. I think it's grant money to be able to do that, as well as there's money available for installation of charging stations. The administration's made a big commitment. And so that really answers the question. In terms of connection to energy burden, I might suggest that there isn't really a connection to energy burden itself, because energy burden really has to do with individual customers and the percentage of their income that they pay towards energy. And so there's not a direct correlation between that in a charging station or that infrastructure. But of course, burden increases when prices go up and folks' income does not go up at the same, right? It's a one. If you make more money and the price goes up, the burden there may not be a greater burden, but if you're making the same amount of money and the price goes up, then the burden increases. Okay.
I just also want to mention there's a company called Spark Charge, which is also a Black-owned company, that their whole kind of moat is to be able to bring portable charging to communities that can't have installed chargers. So there are other solutions that we're seeing come about from, folks that are coming from such areas to say like, hey, here's an option, which is why we should continue to invest in founders like that.
Yeah, awesome. Our next question is this from Angel Smith. As a young Black woman finishing my graduate program, I'm currently in the job searching phase. However, I've had a hard time locating careers in climate policy and/or climate tech innovation that do not require 5+ years of experience. Do you all have any ideas or tips for those of us seeking employment? Holla at your girl would be one thing, Angel. I'm hiring. My organization is hiring, and we're looking for folks in policy. And so please reach out to me. I am absolutely a person who will connect you to my network. Anybody else want to offer Angel some advice?
Yeah, I'll ditto that. We're looking at hiring too at Volt Energy Utility, especially as we're looking at climate policy and looking at IRA implementation. But I would offer one resource that you can leverage, and please reach out to me as well too. There's several trade associations that you can get involved with that can let you know kind of what some of the opportunities are, what are the policy things, because there is a direct need for diverse candidates in policy. So as an example, at the Solar Energy Industries Association, or CEA, where I sit on the board of, we have a young man, Charles Bolden, who was just hired, African-American gentleman, that's running a lot of our climate policy work on the Hill, was instrumental in getting the IRA passed. I'd be happy to connect you with him as well as the American Associations of Blacks in Energy, which has a wonderful legislative conference that I would highly recommend attending. So, there's organizations like that, ACOR, the Clean Energy Buyers Association, where you can get engaged and get involved. And then that way you start to, get to know some of the players in the space, and particularly from a policy standpoint. So happy to chat offline and share some of those resources with you, but great question.
Great question. Sharina and Camille, anything or?
I would add that this space of innovation now that we see with green energy, green technology is more wide open than I've ever seen any industry prior in my past careers. And the opportunity with companies, what I've learned is globally, many companies have not figured it out. They're sending their leadership, their C-suite through different types of programs. So seek out actively companies who are initiating initiatives and need more people within their organizations to spearhead it. I've seen that more, and especially our young people are innovative in tech. You all are instrumental in helping lead some of these initiatives. So do a little bit of homework, and as Gilbert mentioned and Paula, reach out, because you'll find that to kind of explore, get engaged with Canary Media as they're sharing companies as well, and contact some of those companies that are listed.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add, so my head of government relations had zero, like her job title was never government relations before, but she was actually actively involved in her community council. And so she had been actively involved in her community council for almost 10 years. And she was the one that led a lot of the legislation that we pushed forward. So I always tell folks that, like, just make sure that, like, you do have some type of experience in the space, because even as anybody running a company, like, you do want someone to understand how to move through the space. So whether it's you've had the job title, but have you volunteered on a project before? Have you like volunteered with your neighborhood council? Like, what are the other areas of experience? So that way, when you do get into the job, you can be successful. But also reach out. I would be happy to connect you. Her name is Samantha, and she's our head of government relations, and have passed bills and written comments. It never was in government relations prior to this role now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So Angel, you just increased your village by 4 people with one question. Well done. Okay, so we've got a lot of questions coming in. I've got another one that I think is actually really interesting. So I'm going to ask this one. This is from Ben Finzel. Can you talk about the realities of interest in climate tech among communities of color? I think that there's an incorrect assumption that climate tech is only of interest to white audiences. Can you help us see how that isn't the case? And can you help us tell that story to expand the reach of climate tech? So any examples or assistance for this question, I think would be appreciated. Anybody?
I think one way is to really look at, in Oklahoma, in our innovation district, for instance, it's in a community that is predominantly Black. Biotech has taken a position in that area. Green technologies, learning institutions are active in that community. There is concern that the number of individuals employed through those institutions are about 4% Black is the number that is employed. What we found that probably creates more of the bigger stereotype there is actually the investment in STEM programs in minority learning institutions starting at early childhood years or elementary age. And so that interest, I believe that exposure is also a barrier where we do not expose our young people to the same programs that are available by our counterparts or in white communities. So that stereotype exists. I believe it is partners that have also showed up on this call that if they take an active role in the public-private partnerships with our learning institutions and expose it, invest in our school systems, invest in education earlier than what we would see in career tech or university education, that we start and build that interest early, that we will see the dynamics change, that we'll see that data change, and that we'll see that stereotype change.
Mm-hmm. Right. And one thing I'll offer for us, we actually partner with a couple of different organizations, but Block Power is one out of Brooklyn. And we've trained over 500 folks in EV charging maintenance, like a foundational training program. And then these are folks from Brooklyn. And the craziest thing that is like reaffirming to me is like when we teach the curriculum, everyone is just so excited. And more so, they're just like, well, I never knew what that charging station was in my neighborhood was, or I never knew this. It's not that they're not excited about it. Oftentimes they just didn't know. The other thing that's helpful to the show is, you know, when we went out to do our first recruitment of 20 technicians, we had 1,600 people apply from all over across the United States. So I think that there is a huge, huge, huge desire for folks to feel a part of this industry. It's just figuring out how do you get plugged in and how do you feel a part of it. But there's a lot of folks from our communities that are interested in this space.
Yeah, I'll just add two quick examples. Yes, folks in our communities are very interested in this space. First, in 2011, we did a project at Florida Avenue Baptist Church, which is the first African-American church ever to install solar energy. And yes, solar is sexy and shiny, but I always preach, Paul, you'll appreciate this, that energy efficiency is the first thing you should look at.
Thank you.
But the church was very interested in solar, but what that did is it got people engaged from all levels, and we took it a step further, and we helped the church establish a green ministry where people were like, this is solar, how can I do this at home? But more importantly, we taught seminars on how can you read your utility bill, which is made intentionally to be very hard to read. Like, what are kilowatt hours? How can you reduce those charges? And it was infectious. Like, you know, before COVID, if you would go to the church, there'd be youth in the church explaining to you how, you know, you go from DC power to AC power inverters. So it just shows representation matters and showing up in communities, doing projects, but also doing the education and awareness. The second example I'll give is at Howard University, where we're developing solar projects all throughout campus, but we've mandated to all of our subcontractors and partners, they have to minimum hire a paid intern from the university. But we've also hosted town halls on campus where we've had 100+ students coming out to learn about the nexus between climate change, clean energy, and environmental justice. So really it's just a matter of showing up. Our communities understand it. We understand technology. We understand, why we don't have it in our communities and we want it. So again, it's showing up, and that's why diverse representation of business owners that understand the community, comes from the community, is so important. I saw some questions even in the chat. How can we accelerate this? Is standing up companies that are doing this work. There's a lot of companies outside of us that are not on this call. I can mention at least 15 in the EV space and the solar space, and the efficiency space that are doing excellent work. And I did see one other person in the chat that made a remark about my Eagles losing to the Washington team. That's cold. But look, we're still 8-1 and number 1 in the NFC. So I'll leave that at that.
So I was going to ask that question because I saw it. I was like, ooh, that must be a friend. Okay, so we have about 9 minutes left. We're going to try to do a couple more questions before we have to say goodbye. And so our next one is from Katie Fernandez, and she's asking, with the renewable industry expanding so quickly right now, what can individuals and companies do? And I think you've partially answered this already, to make sure that people from disenfranchised communities aren't left behind in this gold rush when STEM fields tend towards one or two demographics. And I think what she's saying is it can't just be those who are in STEM. If those who are in STEM are not diverse, then what other things should we be doing? Go ahead.
One thing I would highly recommend, especially for companies, diversify your boards. It's an excellent opportunity to have diverse voices, not just companies, but the community. If we're talking about community, we have to have the community at the forefront as the target customer to understand what are some of the needs, what are some of the opportunities and some of the challenges. So diversifying your board, which also helps diversify your executive leadership team, the suppliers that you're working with, that's definitely one way. And for individuals, just getting involved with organizations that are doing good work. There's a bunch that I can mention. There's Black Oak Collective that's doing great work to get young people in clean energy jobs. Got to get a shameless plug to our foundation, Sharing the Power Foundation. I mentioned before the American Associations of Blacks in Energy, Dream.org, which is under the umbrella of Green for All, is doing amazing work. So, EV Noir is doing wonderful work. So there's just so many organizations that are out there that, reach out to any of us, and we're happy to share resources, how you can get plugged into communities.
Great. Anyone else have a response? No? Okay. We might be even get even more questions in. So TJ Osborne's question is, what advice do you have for people early in their careers interested in starting their own business in climate tech? And all of you were young when you started these businesses, so you all should have advice.
I'm still young, so I'm gonna go first.
Right. I know that. I heard Gilbert throw out that 40 while he was saying, 13 years ago I did this. So I know you have advice.
For Charger, we started actually through pitch competition. So going to design thinking workshops, you can Google them. So I would say, like, if you're a young person, like, Google is your friend. Everything I have learned has been through a Google search, as a starting point. So definitely looking at like design thinking workshops, looking at pitch competitions. Also, YC Combinator, they have a free startup guide that you can actually go through classes and watch videos from successful founders. But then once you get like what your ideal is going to be, there's things called incubators and accelerators that can help you scale your vision. We're a portfolio company of the LA Cleantech Incubator. We're also a portfolio company of Elemental Accelerator. And the neat things about these two agencies is that being a part of their portfolio, you actually get grant funding, right? So we got grant funding from Lacey to do a pilot project. It was about $10,000, and for Elemental, it was a lot more to do a pilot project as well. But definitely figuring out like what is the thing that you want to solve. Once you figured out what you want to solve, how can you get support? And there's definitely a lot more support out there now than there was before. My dad was an entrepreneur, so I definitely know that I'm living a way different life building a company than he did.
Other advice?
I would share many of those sentiments. Being an entrepreneur for most of my adult life, I would say that now is, again, the prime time for entrepreneurship. To tap into the ecosystem in your state, that's going to vary for different advancements. I'll say being in the Midwest we've been more challenged with some of the movements, the policy that exist in more of your border states. But in those areas where there are smaller communities, you'll find that the ecosystem is easier to gain information through. There, as Camille mentioned, accelerators, some have funding that come with them, some do not have funding, but the big part is network. Also, it's the investment in helping you grow your business. Across the board, across the country, there has been investment in the growth of women-owned and minority businesses. It's almost talked about with every Fortune company that there is some type of program to invest in these types of businesses. So definitely tap in. Now it is absolutely a Google search away to find out what's available in your area.
Thanks, Sharina. Gilbert?
I'll just add first, I know TJ. So TJ, first mistake was going to Hampton University. If you went to Howard, you'd have answered a little bit faster.
Foul. That's not right. That is foul.
But in all seriousness, TJ knows it's all love. Couple things. If you're early on, no matter where you are, credit is so important. We started our business a long time ago with a significant credit line that we took out to launch the business. And I would just say, Camille hit on the accelerators. I saw in the comment that RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, now has a cleantech accelerator. ACOR has a very good tech accelerator. But spend as much time as you do in business development with capital development, understanding the capital markets, the type of capital that you need to grow, understanding project financing capital that's needed, and how legislation plays into all those. So those would be some just things that I would just add: credit, accelerators, as Camille mentioned, and a few other things to help you launch and a successful.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gilbert. So we have about 2 minutes left. I'm going to encourage everybody, take a look in the chat, because people have really been putting in tremendous links to great resources. So if you're not following the chat, funding for disadvantaged communities, Greentown Labs, lots of great resources in there, job opportunities. Take a look at the chat. So with the last few minutes that we have left, our three panelists, final thoughts. Right? The one thing you want us to not forget about you or your business or about this discussion. You get to choose. Miss Sharina, since you're smiling, I'm going to let you go first.
That ultimately the goal in this space is to understand the importance of collaboration and this problem of where we're at and how we got here. It didn't happen overnight, so we'll take collective efforts to do it. We must understand the importance of being able to make advancements within our Black communities, but also understand allyship and how important it is to drive us forward and build those relationships. I couldn't get here where I am today without the support of people that did not look like me. And so understanding that we can't operate in a silo to do it. I often express that we are better together. And that is the model Utopia has built everything that we do in our model around, is this belief that we're better together, and that to step out, be bold enough to shatter glass ceilings. But most importantly, that's a thing of the past. I want us to be a point where we're not shattering glass ceilings. We're invested in taking up space in the room, so much so that no one can deny that we are there. And so I look forward to seeing more people in the space of leadership and Black in this space of green tech.
Thanks, Sharina. Gilbert, you have a final thought?
I would just say we're at a wonderful time in our nation's history. I mean, we legitimately are rebuilding our infrastructure, from decarbonizing the power sector, decarbonizing the transportation sector, and electrifying homes and buildings. That there's a tremendous amount for wealth creation. So we need to make sure that we are creating and supporting and scaling Black entrepreneurs in this space. And I go back to, again, we have to invest in younger people, which is a pipeline to make sure that success is continued. and getting people in the right places and procurement jobs that are making sure that they can help support folks that look like us around this panel. So that's it.
Thanks, Gilbert. And Camille.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's some folks that's interested in breaking into this space. And I just like to offer my story, y'all. You know, I started in this space at a prior company as literally EV driver support. Like I was the person on the phone, literally getting cursed out every day by people who got stranded, you know, and I started to look into how do I set up a call center when my tech company started to make money? How do I, you know, get my own project management degree? And then I started to build at that startup and learned a ton. So when I took the leap to start Charger Help, you know, my co-founders, I'm from South Central, my co-founders from Compton. We started in January 2020, and we really just put our mindset towards what we were going to solve. And then like Sharina was saying, really try to make meaningful connections with folks. But from there, Charger Hope, we've just done such a great job in regards to the team we built. We have over 40 people. We have raised a lot of capital, but it really just came from, you know, doing a lot of the grunt work up front. And we're still doing a lot of grunt work now, but we didn't quit. And so I think for folks that are coming into this space, it's like, it's going to be very hard. Like, it's going to be hard. And we hope that, you know, we will continue to make it easier, but don't give up. Don't let anybody tell you don't belong here. And I think that I would feel comfortable saying that we're all here to be a support. Like I'm always on LinkedIn, always trying to repost stuff. If you're young like me and millennial, I'm on Instagram, reposting things that are happening out there. So please see this as a new community for you. But yeah, don't give up. We need the solutions. They ain't got it figured out yet.
Thank you so much. So we are a little bit over. I want to just say again, thank you, Sharina, Camille, Gilbert. Be sure, visit the websites, Utopia, Charger Help, and Volt Energy. And I will just say my final words are, don't just be an ally, be an accomplice. We got to get this done. Have a great day. And thank you for joining us. Bye.
Thank you, Paula. Job well done.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.